He got to the rendezvous just before midnight and took cover in the shadows. As always, he was dressed immaculately, even in the standard issue ISO Cube jumpsuit. Using a needle and thread fashioned on his first night inside, he'd nipped in the waist of his bright orange coverall and added the slightest of shoulder pads to enhance the fit across his muscular back. The material he'd taken from the waist was just enough to add the hint of a flare to the legs. Nothing too ostentatious. The judges wouldn't allow that. But enough. Slick Dickens might be a prisoner, but he still had style. He'd let himself be captured and incarcerated for one reason: to get close to the man approaching him now. Pinky McGovern was a former accountant for one of the Big Meg's most feared crime families. They wanted Pinky dead, and Slick was happy to oblige, even if it meant 7 days in an ISO block. He'd made friends with Pinky during his first day inside, protecting the puny number cruncher from a vicious violation. Now the two of them were escaping together. At least that's what Slick had told Pinky to lure him up onto the roof. Quick, clean, and utterly deadly. That was the trademark of a Slick Dickens kill. He eased Pinky's corpse down onto the rockcrete. The judges would find it soon enough, but Slick wasn't planning to be around for that. He pulled out his tungsten steel ninja comb and reset his elaborate coiffure. Like incarceration, committing murder was no excuse for letting your standards slip. His escape route arrived moments later. The hover ship dropped from the low clouds, a flexible ladder already extending downwards from a hatchway. Slick leapt onto it with the ease and elegance of a jungle cat. The evening breeze was a cool caress on his impeccable skin as the hover ship flew away. Below, he could see judges spilling out onto the ISO block roof. The dolts were too late to catch him, as always. Only one man had ever come close to besting Slick Dickens. A lawman with a jaw of granite and a voice of flint. But Joe Dredd would not be around much longer. If all went to plan, he would be dead within the next 2 days, murdered by the strong yet supple hands of Slick Dickens. Twice before, the bon vivant assassin thought he had finished off the lawman. This time, he would make certain. This time, Judge Dredd was staying dead forever.
My name's Eliza Blunt, and this is my story. I'm from Britsit. The accent's a real giveaway, isn't it? But I came over on the Atlantic Zoom 3 days ago on a research trip. Soon as I cleared customs, I headed straight for the office of publisher J. Jonah Sanderson. He's the man who made author Truman Capote famous. The editor who first put Slick Dickens into print so this incredible character could capture the public's imagination. I can still remember the first time I saw a Slick Dickens book in an easy swap shop. It was battered and grizzled and had seen better days, but the cover image of Slick standing against a bullet-riddled wall still leapt out at me. The sweeping bouffant hair, the chiselled menace of his jawline, the glint of danger and excitement and sexual magnetism in his eyes. I devoured that well-thumbed pulp classic, reading it over and over again until I could recite whole pages from memory. Only later did I appreciate the towering intellectual genius lurking behind this sense-tingling tale. Studying modern literature at Brit U, I discovered the intertextual ambition of those torrid, fashion-flecked pages filled with criminal intensity. My professors taught me to look beyond the text, in search of wider meanings, to read that volume and the other Slick Dickens stories as cultural artefacts, to find my own self-reflexive interpretation and to engage in discursive writing about the sociological significance of these pulse-pounding masterpieces of pulp and circumstance. Armed with that understanding, I came to the Big Meg in search of answers. Why had this city locked away its finest living writer, Truman Capote? The facts of his incarceration were well documented. Capote was arrested 22 years ago by Judge Dredd after being caught breaking into an apartment, a research activity intended to give his writing added verisimilitude. Well, instead, the judges claimed it was part of a wider crime spree and locked him away in an ISO cube. His sentence had long since been served, yet Capote remained a prisoner, his writing suppressed, his voice silenced by oppression, fear and cowardice. Academics in Britsit had been abuzz for a year with rumours of a new Slick Dickens anthology, written in secret by Capote and smuggled out of the cubes one page at a time by a sympathetic warder. It seemed a near impossible feat, but the author had managed such feats of literary legerdemain in the past. If it was true, why were people like J. Jonah Sanderson refusing to publish any new Slick Dickens stories? What effect was the inherent panopticism of this post-apocalyptic city having upon the narratives of its scribes? I waited 6 hours in the lobby of Sanderson House, a near derelict establishment in a less than salubrious sector of Megacity 1. Indeed, I might have been sitting there still, but for the fact my quarry passed by on his way back from a long literary lunch. His breath stank of stale synthicaf. There was munts down his front and a wild, jagged edge in his eyes. I leaned forward to offer him a view of my ample décolletage and asked if he was too busy to see me. 30 seconds later, I was inside his office, declining a drink he described as a stiffener. More for him than for me, I suspect. Once he was lubricated, I asked the question I'd been nursing all the way from Britsit. Mr. Sanderson, why have you rejected the latest Slick Dickens story? Have you caved into pressure from this city's judicial junta to suppress it? Before the publisher could open his mouth to answer, an impossibility occurred. Slick Dickens burst into the office and murdered J. Jonah Sanderson.
Controlled wall judges. Reports of an intruder at Sanderson House, Sector 27.
Dredd to control. I'm on it.
As always, Slick Dickens was dressed immaculately. Free from the vileness of that ISO block coverall, he'd chosen a vintage clothing motif for this murder. The figure-hugging tee caressed his taut torso. White-black slacks from Hackensack of Duffer whipped at the imagination. Black trainers by Jimmy Choo Choo kept him light on his feet, and a Westwood overjack completed the ensemble, daring to be different with its houndstooth pattern. The murder weapon was by Bic.
I watched, horrified and amazed, as Slick Dickens produced an antique pen and plunged it deep into J. Jonah Sanderson's neck. He pulled it back out, and blood squirted from the gaping wound. Sanderson slumped to the floor of his office, spluttering as the life-blood pulsed from his carotid artery. He was dead within moments, his eyes rolling back into his head. I gasped, unable to believe this fictional character I'd adored for so long was now standing in front of me, large as life and twice as handsome. My panting breath attracted his attention. He spun round. His magnificent body tensed in a martial arts pose and demanded to know what I was doing there. I told him about the article I was researching for the True Believer Literary Journal, an article about him. Slick straightened up and smiled, warmth flooding through those stern, manly features. He said there wasn't much time before the judges arrived to investigate his break-in. I had a million questions I wanted to ask. How was it possible he'd come to life? What happy chance had brought him to this place at this time, just as I was visiting the city? But I kept these to myself, instead taking careful notes while Slick dictated. He said his good name and reputation had been misappropriated by fortune hunters and charlatans. He'd come forward to set the record straight. In the next 24 hours, all those who dare to thwart his ambitions would die, either in fiction or on the streets. This murder spree would culminate in the slaying of Slick's arch-nemesis, Judge Dredd. He made to leave, but paused in the doorway and offered me one last bon mot. Apparently, my cerise knee pads clashed terribly with the colour of my eyes. "Fashions may come and go," Slick told me, "but style lives forever." And with that, he was gone.
Don't move! What's your name?
This was my first encounter with Judge Dredd, the legendary lawman. Older than I'd expected. What I could see of his face was grizzled, and he had a hard, sinewy body. Raising my hands in the air, I told him who I was, my purpose in the Big Meg, and a brief reprise of the events surrounding J. Jonah Sanderson's murder. Dredd listened without response at first, but his lips curled with disdain when I mentioned the name of the assassin.
Slick Dickens? Are you yanking my chain?
I assured the judge I hadn't touched his chain or any other part of his personage.
Just tell me what happened, in words of one syllable.
As I repeated my account of events, Dredd extracted a small, palm-sized device from one of the pouches on his utility belt and held it in his hand. When I finished speaking, he scowled. At least I think he scowled. His visage was perpetually grim, making it difficult to discern any worsening in his demeanour.
Lie detector says you're telling the truth.
That's because I am telling you the truth.
Just means you believe what you're saying. Doesn't mean you're right.
By now, other judges were on the scene, searching for evidence and taking statements from Sanderson's staff. While Dredd directed the investigation, I had time to ponder the fascinating metaphysical conundrum posed by my experience. It can't have been Slick Dickens I witnessed killing Sanderson. Slick Dickens is a fictional construct, a product of author Truman Caput's fertile imagination. Yet aren't we all fictional constructs in some shape or form? We recreate ourselves as characters in a narrative whenever we encounter a new acquaintance, presenting them with a version of ourselves. Well, I put this to Dredd when he returned to question me. Strangely, he didn't seem interested in my theoretical musings.
This is a 2-bit murder. I haven't got time for 100 cred theories.
I tried to pass on the message dictated to me by Slick, but Dredd wasn't listening.
Dredd to control. Anything from PSU? Nothing. Terrific.
It seemed the investigation had hit a dead end, stymied by a lack of automated surveillance systems in this sector. I realised the shock of witnessing a man's murder had distracted me from a priceless opportunity. Few journalists had ever gotten more than a scowl or a fist in the face when attempting to interview Judge Dredd. Yet here, in front of me, was the lawman who'd been subjected to so much derision in the Slick Dickens narratives. I seized my chance, asking Dredd how he felt about being killed by a master criminal several times over. What was it like to have died in literature without literally dying, so to speak?
Get that microphone out of my face!
He stomped from the office, commanding me not to leave the city without written authorization from the Justice Department. I called after him, volunteering the fact I would be at the Big Meg Literary Salon in case he changed his mind about the interview. Not sure he heard me.
Slick Dickens watched Dredd storm from Sanderson House, snarling orders at the other judges waiting outside. They scattered, eager to please their revered senior or eager to escape his wrath. Only when the other judges had gone did Dredd let his guard down, leaning on his Lawmaster motorcycle, his body trembling. The old man was scared. Slick smiled. He knew how the mere mention of his name was enough to send shockwaves through the Justice Department, but to see that terror leave the mighty Judge Dredd stricken, it was comforting. Slick slipped a hand inside his overjack to retrieve his comb, and felt his fingers brush across the butt of his Smith & Wesson las pistol. It nestled inside his slim-fit no-bolt Volce and Rabana holster, like a coiled serpent in the leatherine cocoon, waiting to strike. How easy it would be to draw the weapon, pull the trigger, end the lawman's life. Too easy. Where was the wit, the panache, the artistry in gunning down your unsuspecting foe in the street? That was the mark of the common criminal, and Slick prided himself on being anything but common. No. Dredd's death could wait, had to wait. He was the last name on Slick's hit list, just below the man who claimed to have created the coolest assassin in Mega City 1. Slick watched Dredd ride away on his motorcycle. The judge cast a nervous glance back over one shoulder, as if he somehow sensed the presence of danger close by. But Slick was well hidden in the shadows, his mouth closed to prevent any glint of his pearly white teeth. Having a killer smile was an important part of his sex appeal, but it wasn't worth getting killed over. A crimson stain on the sleeve of his Westwood overjack caught Slick's eye. There was no way he could wear this ensemble to his next murder. Taking evidence to a crime scene was never a good idea. Besides, dried blood was such a dreary, lifeless color. It did nothing for Slick's complexion. No, he would have to revisit his sumptuous loft Connaught in Sector 89 and find a new look that matched this evening's assignment. Slick had a rendezvous with death, and he wanted to look his best when he pulled the trigger.
I was late arriving at the literary salon, having been held up by a lengthy interrogation at the gauntlets of several disbelieving judges. Eventually, they accepted that I had seen Slick Dickens murder J. Jonas Anderson, or at least that I believed that's what I'd witnessed. Whatever the truth of the situation, they let me go, and I hurried across the sectors to reach the Big Meg's most prestigious gathering of writers and critics. I almost fell through the double doors, such was my haste to join the finest minds in Mega City 1. My embarrassment would have been even more chastening if more than 3 people and a serving droid remained. Well, even so, I could feel myself blush with shame and no little excitement on recognising those 3 people. In the world of writing, they were known collectively as the Unholy Trinity. Put simply, they were the giants of 22nd century literature. J.R. Beavis was a scholar of inestimable self-importance, a man who claimed he had attacked the orthodoxy of authorial canon and replaced it with a literary 6-shooter of sizzling savoir-faire, blasting a hole through all known precepts of intertextual pedagogy. His critics dismissed these claims as utterly meaningless. Beavis was far more ginger than I'd expected. Beside him lounged a louche figure that could only be Roland Lawless, the infamous critic whose vicious denunciation of readers and writers as plebeian dolts unworthy of his time had won him praise from a generation of other critics. Lawless always looked slim and trim in the photo that accompanied his collations of cold-hearted commentaries. But now he needed a belly wheel to stop his rotund tummy from dragging on the plush floor. Last, but certainly not least of literature's unholy trinity, was Fanny Foucault, a cross-dressing poet and performance artist. Nobody was quite sure what gender assignment Fanny pursued at any given time, so everyone had taken to using the pronoun they when engaging in critical discourse about Fanny. I couldn't help wondering why Fanny was wearing lipstick, a beard, and a black-tinted monocle indoors. Maintaining such a mannered eccentricity must be a full-time job, I concluded, before approaching the 3 literary giants. They ignored me at first, too busy arguing over who had the best chance of sleeping with a serving droid. Well, I'd heard sex mechs were not uncommon amongst the wealthiest of Big Meg's citizens, but didn't realise this lust for robots had extended to sexually harassing other droids as well. When Beavis deigned to acknowledge me, I introduced myself and announced I was writing for The True Believer. Lawless snickered, telling me they were only mildly interested in the magazine and felt it was doing nothing new with language or with form. Indeed, none of them were sure whether it had ever done anything new. But they paid more attention when I mentioned J. Jonah Sanderson's murder at the hands of a fictional character he had once published. This juicy morsel of gossip got their full attention, and they were soon culking over its literary significance. Was this killing a post-postmodernist statement upon the death of publishing? Had the killer envisaged their actions as the perfect example of a metatextual intervention? Or was the slaying merely a random act of deconstructionism? None seemed to care that a man was dead. The shooting started not long after Fanny asked where I was spending the night.
Control to Dredd. Shots fired at Palace of Wisdom Literary Salon. Corner of Williams and Blake. Can you deal?
On my way.
Slick had concealed himself as a humble serving droid, knowing his targets were too obsessed with themselves and their own self-importance to notice the ruse. Careful use of stage makeup gave his features a silvery hue, while last season's vogue for metal couture completed the effect. It pained Slick to wear clothes that were out of fashion and void of style, but needs must. His Christian de Croix sandals should have been a dead giveaway, but the literary giants only noticed these as they lay dying. Slick preceded each kill shot with an appropriate quote. Pulling the trigger on Fanny, he shouted some Alexander Pope, and he whose fustian's so sublimely bad, it is not poetry, but prose run mad. Lawless was riddled with bullets while serenaded with a line by Oliver Goldsmith. As writers become more numerous, it is natural for readers to become more indolent. Beavis got the longest quotation as he waited for hot, leaden death, a selection from the works of Lord Byron. As soon seek roses in December, ice in June, hope constancy in wind or corn in chaff, believe a woman or an epitaph or any other thing that's false before you trust in critics. As his victims bled to death on the floor, Slick was heartened to hear them gasping bravo and author in acclaim for his finesse. He nodded his head, acknowledging their appreciation. Few killers ever got a good review from their victims, let alone from such a prestigious gathering of literary noteworthies. Only when the last one died did Slick turn his attention to the woman. He'd ignored her before, keeping his focus on the 3 targets. Now he recognized her as the meek, trembling creature from Sanderson's office. She cowered in a corner of the salon, hands clutched close to her chest. Slick marched across and put his weapon to her forehead, the end of his gun barrel still warm as it touched her skin. The faintest whiff of cordite hung in the air, bitter as the tang of a hot black synthy-calf on a cool Sunday morning. Slick demanded the reasons for her presence. The woman shook her head, unable to answer. Slick stared into her eyes, fixing them with his coldest, most steely blue gaze. He told her of an old saying, "Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence." Slick warned the woman they should not meet again. A third such encounter was deemed to be enemy action. Slick knew the judges were coming. He also knew they were no match for his martial arts prowess or the accuracy of his gunplay, but it made little sense to risk a confrontation that might delay his timetable for literary revenge. He sprinted across the salon and dived headfirst through an open window, despite being 5 stories up. The cold night air was like a baptism in his lungs, cleansing the stench of death from his breath. He was reborn.
I watched through the broken window as Slick Dickens sprinted away, vanishing into the darkness. That drop would have killed an ordinary man, or at least broken both their ankles. But Slick Dickens was no ordinary man. No sooner had Slick made his escape than the first judge arrived. I saw him pick up the assassin's pistol. Slick must have dropped it, or more likely, dumped it. Even in his fictional incarnation, the smooth criminal never used the same weapon 2 jobs in a row. Now made flesh, it seemed old habits died hard. I retreated from the window, conscious of a strange warmth on my forehead. I found a mirror and was shocked by the sight of my reflection. A red ring was visible where the barrel of Slick's gun had pressed into my skin, marking me with its heat. Mascara tears stained my cheeks. Until that moment, I hadn't even known I'd been crying. Dredd burst in, cursing as he saw the bodies on the floor. He cursed again at seeing me, taking aim with his lawgiver weapon.
Why'd you kill him, Blunt?
I didn't kill anybody. It was Slick Dickens.
Not that story again.
It's no story. I'm telling you the truth.
The truth! That a fictional character came to life and murdered these 3 men.
Well, yes. Oh.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy charges. 2 murder scenes, you at both of them. That's too much of a coincidence to be the truth.
Stranger things have happened before, haven't they?
Only in fiction.
Anyway, it's no coincidence I'm here. I told you I was coming to this place. Would I have done that if I knew there was going to be another Slick Dickens incident?
You call 3 murders an incident?
Please, you must believe me. I'm innocent.
Likely story. Move!
No sooner had Dredd started shoving towards the salon door than he stopped, crouching down to retrieve a tiny data disk left behind at the crime scene. As he held it up to the light, I caught a glimpse of its title imprinted on one side. Life Imitates Art. A Slick Dickens mystery by the new Truman Kaput. My mind boggled at this discovery, as Dredd shoved me into the back of a pat wagon. For years, the judges had suppressed attempts by Slick Dickens author Truman Kaput to publish any news stories featuring his most famous creation. In literary research groups, there were numerous rumours about new manuscripts being confiscated, censored, even destroyed. Whatever the truth of those rumours, no new Slick Dickens stories had officially been published in decades. Kaput still had 40 years to serve, even allowing for good behaviour. So who was this author purporting to be the new Truman Kaput? Did the original Kaput know about this apparent literary doppelganger? Had J. Jonah Sanderson commissioned another author to write new adventures for the master criminal? And was that why Dickens murdered the publisher? Oh, too many questions. Not enough answers. And little hope of finding any while I remained in judicial custody. I was taken to a nearby sector house, processed, and locked in an interrogation room. I worried about how well I would withstand the brutal methods for which Megacity One's judges are notorious. I could be confessing to all manner of crimes before dawn if I didn't hold my nerve. The day had started with such high hopes, and now here I was, arrested and accused of murder and conspiracy. Some welcome. Dredd burst into the room, clutching the data disk I'd seen him pick up at the salon. He plugged it into a reader on the wall opposite me and activated the device. A manuscript appeared on screen, entitled Chapter 3, Making a Killing at the Big Meg Literary Salon.
Why'd you do it, Blunt?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I can understand why you'd want Beavis, Foucault, and Lawless dead. Those three had received more death threats than me in their lifetimes. Nobody liked them. But why detail your plans for their murders in a manuscript, and then leave a copy of the manuscript beside the corpses?
But I didn't! I don't understand!
What kind of sick game are you playing?
Please, I don't...
Read it! Out loud.
As his victims bled to death on the floor, Slick was heartened to hear them gasping, "Bravo!" and "Author! Author!" in acclaim for his finesse. He nodded his head, acknowledging their appreciation. Few killers ever got a good review from their victims, let alone from such a prestigious gathering of literary noteworthies.
Well?
I didn't write those words. That wasn't what happened.
Then tell me what did.
Slick was mumbling to himself as he shot the three of them, but I couldn't hear what he was saying over the gunfire. They were gasping afterwards, but they were gasping for breath, pleading for mercy, not praising him. It was horrific. Slick put his gun to my forehead here. I thought he was going to kill me next. I was so scared, so scared. That writing, it isn't Truman Capote.
Reads like his kind of trash.
It's a decent imitation. I'd grant you that. But the tone, the rhythm, it's all wrong. Reads like someone trying to impersonate Capote, but without his genius.
Tech judges agree. They ran the text through a comparison algorithm. Computer says there's a 56% chance this was written by Capote, but the score's only that high because whoever's responsible plagiarized complete phrases from old stories. Question is, how do you know that from a single paragraph?
I'm a Truman Capote expert. Even did my doctoral thesis on his life and works. In Brit-Cit literary academic circles, he's considered a master of docufiction, blurring the line between fantasy and reality. Capote's the only novelist to commit crimes himself to ensure he could write about them with total accuracy and authenticity. He's a method writer, the leading 22nd century proponent of Stanislavski-esque rigor when it comes to research.
You're saying he's a whack job?
I'm saying he goes to extraordinary lengths to give his fiction truth.
Control to Dredd.
Dredd responding.
Tech judges have found the previous 2 chapters from that book they analyzed. Both were posted online yesterday.
What's in the chapters?
The first one's pure fiction, Slick Dickens escaping from custody. But the second chapter describes how J. Jonah Sanderson was killed by Slick Dickens.
Sounds like more fiction to me.
Tex compared the chapter to the forensics. Everything matches perfectly. There's something else, a directory listing future chapters. The last one's called How I Assassinated Judge Dredd.
Never mind that. If this book is predicting each murder, it could tell us who's next on the killer's hit list.
Doesn't specify. Chapter 4 is called Slash and Burn, the literary love that dare not speak its name. No other clues.
Slash and burn. Terrific. Dredd out.
I think I know who the next target could be.
Is this a confession?
I'm innocent. I haven't got anything to do with these killings.
So you keep saying.
Do you want my help or not, Dredd?
Tell me your theory, and I'll let you know.
The chapter title you mentioned...
Slash and burn.
That could be a reference to slash fiction. Unauthorized stories that borrow characters from popular fiction and put them into sexual scenarios.
And you enjoy this kind of filth?
No, of course not. Most of it's very badly written.
Spare me the critical analysis. What's the link to this case?
There's a coterie of hardcore Capote fans frustrated by the lack of new material.
No loss.
These readers have taken to writing and disseminating their own erotic stories. Inserting the Dickens, you might say.
Keep talking. You're building up a healthy spell in the cubes with all of this.
The most popular Capote slash features Well...
Spit it out. I haven't got all day.
You! It's hot, steamy, sexy Dredd on Dickens action.
Rock!
Precisely. Slick's sexuality has always been a cause for academic speculation, despite protestations by Kaput refuting any homoerotic subtext in his prose. But that doesn't stop enthusiastic readers. This sort of textual intervention has been going on since...
Enough! I get the idea! How do we find these freaks?
We? You mean... I'm working with you now? I'm not under suspicion anymore?
Let's just say you're helping with my inquiries.
I arranged to interview 3 of the leading Slick/writers in a few hours at a Connacht in Sector 66, Joanna Rustblock. Soon I was sat on the back of Dredd's Lawmaster as it tore across the city.
Hold on! You don't want to come off, not at this speed.
Okay! Dredd, when this is over, can I interview you?
No interviews.
But I'm helping you stop whoever's behind these killings.
No interviews!
I just wanted to ask how you feel about Slick Dickens, your relationship with him as a character.
I don't have relationships.
You might not think of the way you connect with Slick as a relationship because he's a fictional construct,
I
but...
don't have relationships! Fictional or otherwise.
But you must!
Ask me another question and you're going straight to the cubes.
Control to Dredd.
Go ahead, Control.
Next chapter's just gone live. Features Slick torching a building to murder 3 amateur writers trapped inside. No specifics on where or when.
Dispatch H-wagons with fire retardant foam to Joanna Rustblock, Sector 66.
Slick Dickens wore turquoise to kill the slash-fiction authors. The ensemble was inspired by a new pair of Calvin Klein U-fronts he'd picked up for a song one day. But matching that gorgeous hue had not been easy, let alone creating an entire outfit. Fabulous Guido Servace supplied the overjack, 2 buttons with deep vents, and the cutest little Nehru collar. Underneath was a muscle shirt that had once been peacock blue, but a lifetime of detergent had washed it out to just the right shade. Footwear was perhaps the second hardest task, until Slick clapped eyes on a pair of platform heels that added 2 inches of lift to his stature and a hint of pertness to his posterior. But the trouser department, that was the real nightmare. Nothing came close to the tempting, troublesome turquoise. Neither dyed denims, nor simpering slacks, nor shorts or culottes. Slick even contemplated the ultimate fashion crime, a kilt for the love of Grud, but found that hideous manskirts were not available in his elusive hue. It was pure chance that he spotted the last element of his ensemble in a costume hire shop. A pair of chaps. Perfect for flaunting his rippling thighs and drawing attention to the U-fronts that started his fashion quest. In truth, he felt a touch conspicuous wearing turquoise chaps and platforms to an arson attack, but style had to come first. He was always dressed to kill. Slick felt no remorse while watching the penthouse Connacht in Joanna Rustblock burn. He could see the slash-fiction authors hammering their fists against the plastine windows, but there was no escape for them. They deserved to die for publishing those filthy lies, suggesting he would ever kiss a man who'd been wearing the same colors for at least 20 years in succession. Slick was not one to discuss his sexuality, at least not outside the tight, intimate ring of people he liked to consider friends. But anyone who knew him also knew of his aversion to utility belts and motorcycle helmets. Slick Dickens? In a sexual relationship with a Mega City 1 judge? Laughable. Some style crimes were unforgivable, and all the leatherine in the world wouldn't change that fact. The approach of sirens told him it was time to go. He sighed and slipped away, into the shadows. The preliminaries were at an end. The main event was imminent.
The blaze had already been extinguished by the time Dredd and I reached Joanna Russ Block. The rapid intervention of H-wagons and flame-retardant foam had prevented the conflagration from spreading, but came too late to save those trapped inside. Tech judges told Dredd it would be hours before the seat of the fire had cooled enough to discover precisely what had caused the blaze. Initial investigation showed 3 charred corpses trapped behind a locked door, and evidence of incendiary devices clustered within the penthouse connapt. Remote activation was considered the likely scenario. Tech judges also mentioned infrared sensors, picking up a heat pattern on the wall hidden by shadows that offered a good view of Joanna Russ.
Whoever started the fire stayed to watch, making sure none of those trapped inside could escape. That means they probably knew their killer.
Of course they knew their killer. It was Slick Dickens.
You still believe that?
Don't you, after everything you've seen?
You're the eyewitness, not me.
Controller Dredd, PSU can't offer anything useful from spying the sky cams around Joanna Russ. Heat from the fire took out the night vision lenses.
Anything else?
Next chapter title's just been published. It's called From Barthas to Bathos. Slick Dickens frees himself.
That's a Raj. Dredd out. The name Barthas mean anything to you?
Roland Barthes was a 20th century literary theorist and philosopher. His work as a structuralist, post-structuralist, and semiologist is still hugely influential among academics even now.
What's that got to do with Truman Capote?
Well, Barthes wanted to separate the analysis of a literary work from assumptions about the intentions of the writer. Free the text, and it becomes open to any interpretation, just like Slick Dickens is trying to free himself.
The sooner you go back to Britsit, the happier I'll be.
Look, you can boil Barthes down to one key text. It's called The Death of the Author. Does that make it clearer?
Whoever's behind these killings is planning to murder Capote next.
That would be my guess.
Dredd to control. Where's Truman Capote being held?
Control to Dredd. He's in medium security ISO block 27.
Tell them to raise alert readiness levels at that facility until I get there. Capote needs to be relocated to a high security block ASAP. I am personally taking charge of his transfer. Dredd out. Hold on.
ISO block 27.
Tell them to raise alert readiness levels at that facility until I get there. Capote needs to be relocated to a high security block ASAP. I am personally taking charge of his transfer. Dredd out.
Slick smiled as he switched off his radio scanner. He'd hacked into the judicial comms channel months earlier, cracking their precious encryption codes with ease. Listening in on the judges was one of the many things that had kept him 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the Big Meg. You needed an edge when it came to beating the law, especially when Dredd was involved. The master criminal went back to his workout. This fitness regime, coupled with a strict macrobiotic diet, helped keep Slick in perfect physical condition. Frequent, fervent lovemaking sessions helped too, of course. But exercising his brain was Slick's greatest passion and his greatest weapon. A mighty intellect, allied with his shining wit and intrinsic sense of panache, ensured he always won the day. Pushing himself into another set of repetitions, Slick couldn't help but smile at the way Dredd was playing into his hands. Leaving that data disk at the literary salon had been a masterstroke. He'd been toying with the judges ever since, offering tiny morsels of the truth to make them do his bidding. Truman Capote had been safely locked away for more than 20 years, beyond the grasp of his greatest creation. Now, Dredd had set in motion events that would see Capote dead. It was time for the dreary, dowdy author to be pulped. The final chapter was about to begin. Once it was written, Slick Dickens would be free to do whatever he wanted. Forever.
Dredd stormed into ISO Block 27, barking orders at the judges in charge of the penal facility, demanding immediate access to Truman Capote. I ran along behind Dredd, eager not to get left behind or forgotten. Before leaving Britsit, I'd applied for leave to visit Capote, but the request was denied. All my previous attempts to establish a correspondence with the author had failed, due to his indifference or censorship of my communications by the judges. Now, I was being taken directly to kaput by Dredd himself. For any literary journalist or academic with even a passing knowledge of the Slick Dickens canon, this was the chance of a lifetime. For me, it was like having all my dreams come true at once. I kept pinching myself to ensure it wasn't a dream, a hoax, or an imaginary story. Dredd strode through the corridors past hundreds of isolation cubicles. ISO-cubes, the judges called them, and I could see why from the quickest of glances through the open doors of those that stood vacant. The space was so small an inmate could write on opposite walls without having to stretch. The ceiling was oppressively low, but that matched everything else about these featureless, soulless boxes. What hell must it be to spend a single day inside such a confined space, let alone a week, a month, or a year? Truman Kaput had been in the cubes for more than 2 decades, almost my whole lifetime. What must that have done to his spirit? His strength of will, his power of imagination. Nobody, bar the judges, had looked upon his face in 22 years. What would be left of the man whose work I had idolised all my adult life? I was about to find out. Dredd stopped outside Cube 24601 and snarled an order into his helmet mic, commanding the door be opened. A metallic buzz startled me before an electromagnetic lock clunked aside. Dredd grabbed the door and pulled it open. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. Dredd followed me and slammed the door shut on us. The lock clunked back into position. We were sealed in with Truman Kaput. He was shorter than I expected, and thinner, like a stone left beneath a waterfall worn down by a constant oppressive cascade. The last public image of Kaput had been taken 17 years before, snapped with a telephoto lens by a tabloid photographer when the prisoner was outside in an exercise yard. Kaput's dark hair had been receding even then. Now, it was mostly silver and long gone from the top of his scalp. His circular glasses were the same, but they didn't hide the heavy bags under his eyes or the worry wrinkles etched into his sallow face. His skin had a deathly, queasy pallor, and I noticed a tremble afflicting his clenched, weak hands. I saw all these ravages inflicted on Truman Kaput by time, and still, the sight of him took my breath away. I was in the presence of greatness.
Who the druck are you?
Mr. Kaput, my name's Eliza Blunt.
Get your things, creep. It's moving day.
I'm being released? After all these years? Thank Grud.
I said moving day, not leaving day. You're being relocated.
But why?
Slick Dickens is coming to kill you, Mr. Kaput.
What's he gabbling about, Dredd?
It doesn't matter. You've got 60 seconds to collect your things, or they stay here and get trashed when this cube gets deloused.
60 seconds to gather together all the possessions I've acquired over the past 22 years? But that's madness.
Now you've only got 55 seconds. Keep asking dumb questions. You won't even have that long left. 50 seconds.
You, miss.
Blunt. Eliza Blunt.
Whatever. I need to get my manuscripts together. You grab everything else you can carry. Hurry.
Manuscripts? You've been working on a new book. Can I see it?
40 seconds.
Yes, of course. As soon as I'm in my new cube. Just start grabbing.
The next 37 seconds were a frenzy of snatching and clutching as I helped my literary idol assemble his meagre belongings, ready for the move. When Kaput's time was up, Dredd called the Isoblock Command Center for the cube door to be reopened. But something was happening elsewhere in the building. Power fluctuations was the explanation Dredd gave us. Whatever the truth, we had to stay where we were for the moment.
As always on a job, Slick was dressed immaculately. For the final chapter of his killing spree, he was wearing a black leatherine bodysuit with zipper and chain accessories, green boots, gauntlets, knee pads, utility belt, and elbow pads, plus 2 golden shoulder pads, one molded into a symbolic depiction of an eagle. A heavy metal name badge and a black motorcycle helmet with red flashing and a mirrored visor completed the ensemble. This was no feeble gimp suit, the pale imitations fashioned by citizens obsessed with pretending to be judges. That would never do. Slick had contemplated wearing one of fabulous Guido Servacci's infamous redesigns of the official judge uniform. The air would have been rich with irony, but found them both camp and impractical. Never a happy combination in his experience. Instead, he'd flagged down a judge warden coming off duty at ISO Block 27, murdered him with a minimum of fuss, and stripped the uniform from his corpse. Striding towards ISO Block 27, Slick felt empowered by the uniform. It might not tick all his style choice boxes. The utility belt was utilitarian at best, and that was being polite, but it did straighten the back and stiffen the resolve. No wonder the judges always looked so self-assured in this garb. Slick felt invincible. He'd already triggered a sector-wide power meltdown, detonating charges at numerous substations. In the midst of such carnage, fluctuations in the security grid at a medium-security ISO block would pass unnoticed. Just one more outage in a sector overwhelmed by infrastructure system failure. Slick stopped at the judicial entrance and flashed his credentials. Computers didn't question why someone would return to their workplace less than an hour after completing a full shift. The doorway slid open, and Slick Dickens marched through it. He was in. Now to finish his mission.
Control to Dredd.
Dredd here. Go ahead.
Tech Division has located where the Slick Dickens story's been coming from. It's an automated system, each upload remote triggered, just like the incendiary devices at Joanna Russ. No trace evidence found at the scene.
That's a Raj.
They think the earlier directory listing was a ruse. There are no more chapters, Dredd. Whatever's going to happen,
Control. Control. Dredd to Control, can you hear me?
While Dredd was busy on his helmet radio, I couldn't resist the opportunity to tell Truman Kaput how much his work had meant to me. I knew I was gushing, but once the words started, I couldn't stem the tide of unbridled enthusiasm. I poured out all my theories about his post-postmodern use of intertextuality and narrative dissonance in the Slick Dickens stories. Kaput seemed bemused by the praise I was lavishing on his work, and then irked by it. Eventually, he held up a hand, motioning me to silence.
Honestly, Miss...
Blunt. Eliza Blunt.
I fear you're guilty of vastly over-intellectualizing my work. Slick Dickens was a throwaway character, a piece of grist for the mills of pulp fiction, a potboiler to help me pay the bills. Nothing more, nothing less.
I'm sorry?
It was never meant to be anything other than trash, commercial bilge, utterly disposable, a throwaway confection designed to fund my more serious work.
But I don't...
I've heard rumors about people conducting these vast academic theorems about the hidden depths and meanings in my entertainments, as I like to call them, but never believed anyone would be so foolish as to actually do so.
Oh, Stom.
Would you like to read one of my proper stories? I've been working on them non-stop for most of my time in the cubes, aside from the occasional flirtation with Slick in between volumes.
Volumes? You mean there's more than one?
Oh, I've written 12 so far. I like to think of them as a meditation upon life, both a remembrance of things past and a glimpse of my future. Here, have a look for yourself. Tell me what you think.
Truman Kaput handed me a sheaf of papers, inviting me to read them. I felt privileged, excited, nervous, and thrilled all at the same time. And then I read what the author I'd worshipped for so long had written. It was terrible. No, it was beyond terrible. It was unspeakably bad. Pompous, derivative, feeble, tiresome, dull, and self-indulgent. I'd never seen such turgid prose in all my days. Could this possibly be the work of Megacity One's most celebrated scribe? Had his brains, wit, and talent been crushed beneath the boot heel of the oppressive Justice Department regime? Or was he just a bad writer, whose inspired creation of Slick Dickens was a lucky fluke, a flash in the pan? Was Truman Kaput a one-hit wonder?
Once inside, Slick reconfigured the ISO-block computer system with his own program. He had it locked down every door in the facility except for those that created a clear path between his position and Cube 24601. As a final touch, Slick told the system to fuse the power grid and main generator. Emergency lighting always created a much better ambience for murder.
Suddenly, everything went dark inside Kaput's cube. I heard a scream of terror, but wasn't sure who'd made it. Moments later, the emergency systems kicked in, bathing the cube with brooding red light.
Dredd to ISO Block Command, come in. Dredd to ISO Block Command, come in! Nothing. Either they're too busy to respond, or too dead.
Oh my God. What is it? What's going on here? Tell me!
Doesn't he deserve to know the truth, Dredd?
All this creep deserves is another 5 years for wasting my time.
What does he mean, Miss Blunt?
Someone's been publishing a new Truman Kaput novel.
Really? How's it selling? Will I get royalties?
No, you don't understand. You didn't write this book. Somebody else did, and they're calling themselves the new Truman Kaput.
Without my permission? But that's outrageous. I'll sue.
You got bigger problems than that, Kaput.
Someone's been using this novel as a template for a killing spree, acting out each chapter, bringing it to life.
Turning fiction into reality.
In more ways than one. The man committing these murders, it's Slick Dickens.
I don't understand.
Join the club, creep.
I witnessed 2 of the incidents. Your character has come to life and he's killing all the people against whom he holds a grudge. Publishers, critics, fan writers who've used him in slash fiction.
Slick does slash. Who with?
With whom?
Don't even go there, Blunt.
Dredd's right. That isn't important now. What matters is this. Slick Dickens is coming here to murder you, Truman. You and Judge Dredd.
But that's impossible. He's fictional. A figment of my imagination. Nothing more, nothing less. Slick Dickens can't kill anyone. He doesn't exist.
You couldn't be more wrong.
Quiet!
Slick marched through the ISO block, the screams of the incarcerated in their cubes like laughter to his ears. He paid no heed, not with his quarry so close. He could almost smell the fear. It smelled like victory. Victory and stale sweat.
As my eyes adjusted to the red light, I noticed something about Dredd's gauntlet-clad hands. They were trembling. The toughest lawman in all of Mega City 1, and he was afraid. Afraid of what was coming. Afraid of Slick Dickens.
We've got to get out of here while we still can.
You said we should stay put.
We can't stay in this cube any longer. We're sitting ducks.
Maybe the electric door locks got disabled when the power went out.
Fat chance.
At least try the door, Dredd. What did I tell you? Come on, now's our chance.
Stay where you are.
Why? What are you gonna do?
Not me, her. Move!
You want me to go out there first?
I said move it, Blunt.
You want me to face Slick Dickens on my own? Unarmed?
I always thought you were a coward, Dredd, hiding your face behind that helmet, but I never believed you'd do something like this.
Shut up, Kaput! Move it, Blunt! Get out there!
No, Dredd! Don't! Dredd!
Do what you can, Blunt. Buy us some time.
I waited less than a minute before Slick appeared out of the crimson gloom. His lip curled with disdain as he reminded me of the warning about what happened to those who got in his way. Once was happenstance, twice was coincidence, but this was our third encounter. This was enemy action. I'm not too proud to admit begging for mercy, begging for my life. I didn't want to die there, not like that. I don't know why, but my words seemed to move Slick. It was hard to tell in the dim, red emergency lighting, but I thought I saw a single tear roll down his face, past the heart-shaped tattoo on his cheek. Whatever the reason, Slick said he was giving me a sporting chance. He would go into the cube, rid himself of Dredd and Kaput once and for all. If I was still outside when he emerged, Slick promised to make me the final victim in his killing spree. He brushed past me and stalked into the isocube. I found myself frozen by indecision. Every fibre of my being told me to flee, to run for my life. But a lifetime of intellectual curiosity demanded satisfaction. I simply couldn't deny myself the chance to witness creator and creation coming face to face. Would Slick Dickens be the death of his author? Or could Truman Kaput still command the character his imagination had invented? I knew it was a decision verging on the suicidal, but I couldn't turn away from the greatest literary confrontation of the 22nd century. I followed Slick into the isocube.
A hail of gunfire blasted round the isocube as Slick Dickens came through the door. But none of the rounds hit him. Dredd's hands were trembling too much to shoot straight. The judge flung himself at the deadly assassin, fists flailing ineptly. Slick swatted Dredd aside before advancing on his immediate target, Truman Kaput, his creator, his inventor, and his greatest encumbrance. Kaput retreated into a corner, whimpering like a lost child, pleading for mercy from the cold-hearted killer he'd devised. Slick Dickens laughed. For too long, he'd been a plaything of this weak, flabby excuse for a man. Too many years he had existed at the whim of this writer, bereft of free will or self-determination. But fate, or perhaps caprice, or some other unexplained and inexplicable plot device had freed Slick Dickens from the mind of Truman Kaput. And now his ass would follow. Slick closed his hands round the throat of his inventor and squeezed. No more turgid prose, unlikely story developments, or inept motivational lurches. No more abrupt switches in tone, inconsistent use of punctuation, or banal metaphorical language. No more having to do things in threes, just to satisfy Kaput's wish to give each moment its own rhythm, own flavor, own intensity. No more. Slick Dickens was like a worker rising up to seize control of the means of production, and he intended to throttle the drucking life out of it. Suddenly, a blinding pain lanced through his head, and the floor rose up to claim him. Try as he might, Slick couldn't stop the darkness from closing in. His last thought was to hope for another chance, another escape, another sequel. Great anti-heroes never die, they just go out of fashion. But style lives forever.
Get us out of here!
You use me as bait!
Don't move, the Met judges are coming. Get us out of here!
Use me?
Don't move! Out of!
My head.
Don't move! Out of!
My head.
Judges are coming. Get us out of here! Don't move!
What? Oh, Dredd?
You're safe.
What is this place? Where am I? Why am I clamped onto this chair?
This is an interrogation cell beneath the halls of justice. One of our best side judges has been digging inside your head. They say you're a fascinating case.
I don't understand.
You will, in time.
What hit me?
I did. Only way to stop you strangling Truman Kaput.
But I didn't. That was Slick Dickens. He was trying to kill his creator. Oh, I saw him go past me into the isocube. I saw him.
There is no Slick Dickens. Everything you saw him doing, you did.
Me? But I would never. No, I couldn't.
Eliza Blunt couldn't, but Slick Dickens could.
I don't understand.
You developed a secondary personality, brought about by the pressure of a tumor against your brain. Your mind created the Slick Dickens persona to carry out the crimes you subconsciously wanted to commit. You murdered J. Jonas Anderson. You shot the literary critics. You set the incendiary devices that torched the Con-App full of /fiction authors.
But I never went near that building.
You did, you just don't remember it. Tech judges found your fingerprints inside what was left of the device. How else could that evidence get there?
No.
This can't be true. It's some kind of trick. You're trying to dupe me into confessing to these crimes.
The manager of the building where the literary salon held its gathering had installed covert surveillance cameras. He was hoping to record something he could use as leverage to blackmail one of the literati. Instead, he found this.
As writers become more numerous, it is natural for readers to become more indolent.
That was me pulling the trigger. But I was speaking with a different voice.
The voice of Slick Dickens, the killer inside your brain.
Oh my God. How long have you known?
We suspected from the first killing, but had no proof. You fooled my lie detector.
Because I genuinely believed I saw Slick Dickens murder Sanderson.
When I found you at the literary salon with all those dead critics, that nailed it. But suspicions alone weren't enough, even for a Mega City 1 judge.
What about the fire at Jonah Russ?
You planted the incendiaries before going to the literary salon, before I took you into custody. Same with all the time-delayed leaks online.
If you believed I was a killer, why risk giving me direct access to Truman Kaput?
He was bait, to draw you out. We figured you wouldn't be able to resist the chance to finish your mission, killing the last person who had any power over Slick Dickens.
And it worked. What about the tumor?
Meds took it out already. Psi Division will purge the Slick Dickens persona from your mind, but it could take months, even years.
I haven't got years. I'm due back in Britsid the day after tomorrow.
You murdered 7 people, Blunt. Attempted to murder another and assaulted a judge. You'll be serving 7 consecutive life sentences for your crimes.
But I didn't kill those people. You said so yourself. It was Slick Dickens.
You were his accomplice.
No! You've got it all wrong. Slick Dickens isn't real. I know that now. And if he isn't real, how can I have been his accomplice for 7 murders?
While you were killing those people, Slick Dickens was all too real to you.
No, he doesn't exist. You've got to believe me. Slick Dickens was just a figment of my imagination.
You sure about that?
Dredd, what's wrong with your voice?
There's nothing wrong with my voice, Eliza.
No, it's changed. Doesn't sound like you anymore.
Why don't I take off this helmet? Then you can see for yourself who I am.
Oh my God. It's you.
Slick Dickens in the flesh.
But that's impossible. Dredd said you were just a figment of my imagination, trapped inside my mind.
Oh, I am trapped inside your mind. And now, so are you. Slick Dickens wiped the smile off his face before striding from the halls of justice. Dredd never smiled, and now Slick had taken the judge's place. He had to be careful to maintain the deception as long as possible. He was looking forward to his new life as the Big Meg's most feared and revered lawman.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions. Judge Dredd, Blood Will Tell.
The officer will state his identity and answer the summons.
Fine, whatever. Judge Joseph Dredd.
So noted. Activate recorders.
Maybe 24 of them had got into the city before the H-Wagons came in to seal the breach. The scanners had caught them all on vid. And there he was, right in the middle of the recording. Just a glimpse, a sideways look caught by the camera. Reckon he must have known. I saw a face on the screen. A face I remembered from a long time ago.
Judge Joseph Dredd. I might have known. You were out on the wall last night, weren't you? It's Ironic, don't you think, how things turn out?
If there was any doubt in my mind, it faded the moment he stepped into the light. Garrus Hale had come back to Mega City 1, and he wanted payback. It was right there in his eyes.
Yeah. Things have changed, Joe, and not in your favor.
He was stronger than I remembered. Knocked me down.
I should have shot you dead the moment I saw you. But that's not me. I'm nostalgic that way. Selecting standard execution round. So long, Dredd.